I was curious. I had heard a description of what a shepherd was maybe a few months ago, and learned a little bit more regarding what a shepherd is, and got to actually witness shepherds in Israel on our trip there last year, right before COVID. So a description of a sheep shepherd: the responsibility of shepherds was to keep their flock intact, protect them from predators, and guide them to market areas in time for shearing. Some flocks may include up to 1,000 sheep. They will graze the animals, herding them to areas for good forage and keeping a watchful eye for poisonous plants. The shepherd would often carry a shepherd's crook, like you've seen in some photos, which served as a walking stick, but also the significant function to snag a straying sheep. This is something I learned, which I thought was pretty cool. They were also used to hook around the sheep's neck if they were to fall in the water, because as the sheep go down to the water to drink, sometimes they don't realize how far in they are. They're not entirely smart animals, and sometimes they slip in, and because of their wool, the water weighs them down and they get swept in the current and actually drowned. And so that crook is to gently snag them around the neck and pull them up to safety out of harm's way and death. So the shepherds would give their life for the sheep, and the sheep recognize the voice of the shepherd and follow him or her. And I envision the illustration of Jesus with the lamb over his shoulders, which is always a really comforting image. So I also included that in the handout. So in the last few weeks, we've been studying 1 Peter. And in 1 Peter, we've been observing what it's like for Christians to suffer for their faith. But it's also important to remember, like in Debbie's opening prayer, that we don't suffer alone. God has given us the church, our community, and our family to rely on and to build one another up collectively, especially during times of suffering, which is the importance of this group, right? So the understanding and application in times of suffering must begin with our leadership, right? So again, shepherding in the midst of suffering. So Peter witnessed Jesus' death and his resurrection. He preached at Pentecost and became a pillar in the Jerusalem church. He and the elders witnessed and experienced suffering for faith firsthand. I mean, can you imagine witnessing Jesus die on the cross and the resurrection and the aftermath? And just amazing. So they had a little experience under their belt. But in the midst of suffering, what are the elders to do? What are we to do? So a few characteristics of good leaders and what they can embody is, first slide here, the first one, care for God's flock. And that's found in 1 Peter verse 2. Leaders aren't meant to just preach or discipline. Go figure. But it includes feeding, watching, and caring on a deeper level. Overseeing their soul, confronting sin, and comforting during hardships. So my experience with this would probably be, I have a fortunate opportunity to join my husband in coming alongside recovering addicts. So I get to come alongside people and teach them about Jesus, help with conflict resolution, celebrating their little victories. Big victory, which seems sometimes insignificant if you're not familiar with addiction, is just staying sober during times of suffering or sober during the holidays, which can be really challenging. I'm reminded constantly in the environment we live in that it's not just about, hey, you need to do your chores, and hey, when was the last time you went to a meeting? Because I tend to be really business and task oriented. So I have to kind of scale back and just be present and slow down and recognize it's about coming alongside them on more of a relational level. And so spending time, even if it's just 5 minutes, to hear about how their day was. And so, being a good leader, for me, caring for God's flock is just kind of slowing down and kind of coming alongside them on a more relational level. So that was my experience. In Isaiah chapter 40, verse 11, he will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will carry the lambs in his arms, holding them close to his heart. He will gently lead the mother sheep with their young. Again, I just find that very comforting, just like that image we saw earlier. So think to yourself, what flock has God entrusted you with? You may not be a senior pastor of a big church, right? I'm not. But everybody has influence in some way. You may be a mother. You may help organize volunteers. You may be on a sports team, lead cheerleaders. You may lead a Bible study, manage, employees or clients. You may even, as simple as spotting a problem and be able to help find a solution. That's being a good leader. And everybody has a good opportunity at some point, some walk in their journey to be a good leader or just an influencer. So the first fill in the blank is care for the flock that God has entrusted you with. Again, that could be being a mother, even a mother to fur babies, cats or dogs. That's me. And the second characteristic of a good leader is leading out of eagerness to serve, not out of obligation. And that's found in 1 Peter 5, again, verse 2. Leaders are to shepherd God's flock humbly, honestly, and willingly, not through grumbling, uncomplaining, but eagerly in response to the work of God in their life. I can grumble and complain with the best of them. I'm your gal. Misery loves company. I'm always good to be the first one to complain. But living in the ministry that we are in, I have learned with addiction, it never sleeps, right? We live on the property, so we're kind of on all the time. So I would become increasingly agitated every time there was a knock on the door, because inevitably it's always during dinner or when Lance and I are just trying to kick back or having, an in-depth conversation. So I started recognizing it was creeping in as like an irritation. It would be an inconvenience, an interruption in our evening out of this like selfish desire because I wanted, hello, we can't clock out. That's just the nature of where we live. So I started to kind of shift my focus and try to redirect it into more of an opportunity to, again, come alongside them, hear their story. They have anxieties. Sometimes they don't know how to quelch it. And so for me, I have to recognize that I'm blessed that God has placed us in this place of ministry to serve and to be able to witness alongside others. So that shift perspective really, really helped me, going from an interruption versus now to an opportunity. So do you sometimes grumble or complain when facing responsibilities or situations? I still do. I still struggle with that. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 14, do everything without complaining and arguing so that no one can criticize you. It's a good one to put on a Post-it note, especially maybe in your car when you're driving, especially lately. So the next fill in the blank, shift your focus from complaining to eagerly responding to serve. The next characteristics of good leaders. Leaders are concerned what they can give, not for what they can get. Selfless leadership is not just a refusal to put our own desires first, but a willing spirit to put the needs and desires of others before our own. I can be so selfish. I'm an only child. I know. I didn't get all the toys I wanted for Christmas, but yeah, I'm spoiled. I'm an introvert. I'm very shy by nature, and so I inevitably want to spend my time how I want to spend my time, and God doesn't always see it that way. And again, God's placed me in an environment where I'm kind of serving all the time, and it's not about me. So we serve 46 people in our 4 houses, again, recovering addicts trying to get their lives back on track. And so sometimes my schedule doesn't always line up, and I'm, again, task-oriented. I have the boxes. I like to check them, but, sometimes they have to wait. So something that I've learned in putting my needs aside sometimes is sometimes I'd rather spend my weekend sleeping in or, again, doing what I want. But lately I've been trying to create more community activities in the house. And so I planned our second annual chili cook-off recently. And it was a lot of fun. So I set my needs and my desires aside for the weekend, and I spent some time setting up the garage and making homemade ribbons and having people sign up and bring their own pot of chili. We all voted and had prizes and stuff. And what motivated it was the first year we did it last year, where people were still talking about it this year. Remember last year's chili? Oh my gosh, that was the best chili. And, blah, blah. And so it created good memories for the people that were still there from the year before. And so that was me wanting to create those memories for them and putting me sleeping in or going shopping for them. And so not always easy to do, and I'm not perfect at it, but that was my attempt to kind of put my needs aside. So again, what you can give, not what you can get. Do you find ways in what you can get out of a relationship? Because I know I can tend to be kind of manipulative sometimes in conversation and relationships. So do you tend to try to see what you can get out of a relationship or situation, or what you can bring to the table, or what you can give. So something to ponder. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4 through 7, as we all know, this is a common one. Love is patient, love is kind. It is not envious. Love does not brag. It is not puffed up. It is not rude. And it's not self-serving. Newsflash. And the next fill in the blank, look for ways that you can give, not what you can get. The next good characteristic of a good leader is lead by example, not by force. That's in 1 Peter, verse 3. Leaders do not need to dominate over their flock, or your family, your team, your group, acting as a dictator with an iron fist. Rather, the shepherd of God's good church are the examples of the flock, again, exuding humility and honesty. Lance and I live under a microscope in our houses. People are really watching our relationship. They've never actually, not all of them, but many of them have never really been around healthy relationships. They grew up in broken homes and broken, divorces and their parents and stuff, and they themselves have been through a lot of turmoil in relationships. So we're under a microscope. So part of our responsibility as leaders in the house is we lead by example, and it's really important for us to not have some of those tough conversations behind closed doors. Up until recently, we had 2 roommates since we've been married, always living in our space, and so we never really, maybe if we're in our bedroom, we have privacy, but we didn't really feel like we needed to hide our conversations. We wanted to be candid and be able to not necessarily invite people in, but allow them to witness some of our conflict resolution or just hashing things out. So just kind of allowing them to witness. But a big way that we lead in the house by example is we follow the rules that we ask the residents to. And that means honoring the curfew, making our bed every day, sometimes random UAs. Urinary analysis. Clean pee is what that is. Making sure you're sober. So that's what we ask of our residents, and so we do the same. We attend the house meetings, we're very involved, with our check-ins, how many meetings we've been to a week. So that's how we honor the rules that we're asking others by doing it ourselves. So are you leading by good example? Whether it's your family or your small group, would Jesus be proud of your shepherding? Again, we're not perfect, but we try. In John chapter 13, verses 12 through 15, after washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, "Do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you."